You think negotiation is, I don't know, an FBI agent with a megaphone outside a bank vault? Or like some slick executive in a glass boardroom sliding a piece of paper across a mahogany table?
Yeah, that's always the movie version, right?
Exactly. But let's be real. You negotiated today. Like when you decided who was going to answer that incredibly passive-aggressive client email this morning, you were negotiating.
Oh, 100%.
When you compromised on a project deadline with your team leader over Slack, or, when you just sat there on a Zoom call and let someone else dictate the timeline for a project you're managing, you were negotiating.
You're always negotiating.
Right. Every single interaction you have is a negotiation of influence. And if you aren't doing it with purpose, if you are just accepting the default settings of your daily life, well, you are leaving massive opportunity on the table.
It is the unseen architecture behind literally everything we do. And yet we treat it like this rare, traumatic event that only happens when you, I don't know, buy a house.
Which brings us to our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into Tim Castle's framework from the art of negotiation. The goal here is to extract a precise, actionable blueprint for turning your everyday hesitation into actual leverage.
And it's a brilliant framework.
It is, but here's the thing. And I'm just going to lay my cards on the table right out of the gate here, because I am coming into this deep dive with a heavy, heavy dose of skepticism.
I wouldn't expect anything less. Let's hear the skepticism. I'm ready.
Look, it is 2026. We are living in a world of endless asynchronous communication. We are drowning in AI-generated emails that sound like a robot trying to be your best friend.
Yeah, those are the worst.
They are. And our mental focus is absolutely fried by notifications. Plus, career trends are more volatile than they've been in a decade. We just watched massive restructurings happen across multiple industries. People are terrified.
They really are. Everyone is on edge.
Right. They avoid conflict like the plague right now. If someone pushes back too hard in an email thread, they don't get a counteroffer. They just get ghosted. They get left on red.
Yeah, the digital cold shoulder.
Exactly. So my core challenge today is this. Does this bold step up and demand what you want approach actually work in this environment? Or is it just a fantastic way to get yourself labeled as difficult by some algorithm and permanently locked out of the conversation?
That is honestly the ultimate question for this decade. And the reality is that fear of being ghosted is exactly why this material matters more today than it did 10 years ago.
Okay, how so?
Well, in a digital world where the loudest, most frantic, most reactive voice usually wins the short-term attention, Castle is showing us a completely different paradigm. He argues that true leverage doesn't lie in being loud, and it certainly doesn't lie in being demanding.
Right, nobody likes the demanding person in the Slack channel.
Exactly. It lies in quiet strategy, radical empathy, and mastering the unseen psychological dynamics of a conversation.
So if the 2026 default is to be lax and frantic, the counter move is to be calculated and quiet.
Calculated, quiet, and hyper-prepared. Today, we are going to break down the actual neurology of why we fear asking for things. We're going to debate some highly counterintuitive strategies for handling rejection.
And some of them sound pretty wild.
These sound completely crazy on paper, but they are devastatingly effective in practice.
I am already gearing up to fight you on some of those rejection tactics, but I am ready. Let's do it.
Bring the fight. And if you stick with us through that, we're going to uncover a massive breakthrough realization buried right in the middle of Castle's framework. It's an insight that completely flips the script on what it actually means to win a negotiation. It changes the entire definition of the word.
I love a good paradigm shift. But before we get to the flashy tactics, like the exact phrases to use when you're staring down a stubborn client, we have to confront the ghost in the room.
The fear.
Yes, we have to talk about why you, the listener, are terrified to ask for things in the first place. Let's look at the foundation, because Castle spends a lot of time early on talking about self-belief and shifting from scarcity to abundance.
He does, yeah.
And honestly, when I was reading those chapters, my internal alarm bells were going off. It sounds like motivational fluff.
I can see how it reads that way at first glance.
It sounds like, oh, just visualize success and the universe will hand you a promotion. In a tough career market where companies are slashing budgets, doesn't leverage just come down to who holds the purse strings? Like, does mindset actually matter when the math is against you?
I am so glad you brought up the math, because that is where people completely misunderstand the concept of confidence in negotiation. Castle entirely dismantles the myth that confidence is some mystical trait you're born with.
Or some empty affirmation you chant in the mirror before a Zoom call.
Exactly. He argues that confidence isn't a personality trait at all. It is a biological and strategic result.
A result of what, exactly?
Rigorous, almost obsessive preparation.
Okay.
The negotiator who walks in with courage wins, because that courage is built on a foundation of knowing the data cold.
Yeah.
It's the difference between arrogance and confidence.
Right, because those are very different things.
Vastly different. Arrogance is walking into a performance review empty-handed, puffing out your chest, and demanding a 20% raise just because you feel you deserve it.
Which never works.
Never. Confidence is walking in with a spreadsheet detailing how your specific workflows saved the company 40 hours a week over the last 2 quarters.
Right. So it's not I am a star, it's here is the undeniable empirical data proving my impact.
And the absolute core of that data-driven preparation is a concept Castle calls the goal anchor.
The goal anchor. This fascinated me. But the way I read it, it's more than just knowing what you want. It's about setting the gravity of the room.
I love that metaphor. Setting the gravity. Explain how you see that working.
Well, the cognitive bias of anchoring is a real psychological phenomenon. The first number or concept introduced in a conversation literally alters the neural pathways of how the rest of the discussion unfolds.
It creates the baseline.
Exactly. If I walk into a salary negotiation just thinking, man, I hope I get a bump, I have no anchor. So if my boss offers a 3% raise, my brain immediately starts orbiting their planet. 3% becomes the center of gravity.
Because you didn't bring your own gravity?
Right. I might fight for 4%, and if I get it, I'll walk out feeling like a genius. But I was playing in their universe the whole time. If my goal anchor was a 15% raise, backed by market data,
then you aren't reacting to their lowball offer at all. You have established a completely different center of gravity. And this is crucial for the 2026 landscape.
why specifically now?
When you are communicating asynchronously, say, over an email thread or a shared Google Doc, you don't have a benefit of reading body language or building rapid rapport. Your anchor has to be undeniable. It has to be a fixed point that all other variables adjust around.
And part of that fixed point is knowing when to walk away, which brings us to BATNA. Now, anyone who has read a business book knows the acronym BATNA, Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement.
The classic rule.
Yeah, it's what you do if the deal fails. But I think where a lot of people struggle today is how to actually use it without sounding like they're issuing a threat.
That is the ultimate trap. People think having a BTNA means slamming your fist on the table and saying, if you don't give me this, I'm quitting, and going to your competitor.
Which is an awful strategy.
It's a totally amateur move.
Right.
Castle's approach to BTNA is much more internal. If you don't know your BTNA, you are negotiating from a place of deep physiological fear.
Because you need the deal too badly.
Right. Your nervous system is terrified of losing the deal because it feels like a matter of survival. But if you have spent 3 weeks interviewing elsewhere, or you have a solid side hustle income, or you simply know you can survive on savings for 6 months, you negotiate from a position of profound, quiet strength.
So you don't necessarily have to say, hey, I have another offer. The mere fact that you know you have another offer changes your tone, your posture, and your tolerance for bad terms.
It bleeds through in every micro-expression and every word choice. You aren't clinging to the outcome.
You aren't desperate.
Exactly. That is the abundance mindset Castle is talking about. It isn't a mystical vibration. It is the strategic reality of having options.
Okay, so I have my goal anchor, I have my BATNA, I'm feeling prepared. But Castle takes this prep one step further, and I think this is where the strategy gets incredibly relevant to the tech-heavy, paranoid culture we work in today.
You're talking about strategic empathy.
Yes, strategic empathy, which honestly sounds like an oxymoron. Empathy is usually about feelings and connection, and strategy is about winning and leverage.
He blends them brilliantly, though. He argues that great negotiators are almost forensic empaths. You don't just prepare your own pitch, you spend an equal amount of time preparing to understand their hidden pressures.
So not just what they want, but what they're afraid of.
Yes. Think about a mid-level manager in 2026 who is being pitched a massive new AI software integration by a vendor. What is that manager actually afraid of?
Oh, they aren't afraid of the price. They are afraid that the implementation is going to take 6 months, it's going to break their current systems, their team is going to revolt over Slack, and they are going to look like an absolute fool to the executive board.
Exactly.
Their fear is reputational risk and massive overtime.
You nailed it. So if you are the vendor and you go in just pitching the shiny features of your software and the cost savings, you're answering questions they aren't even asking.
You're missing the target entirely.
But if you use strategic empathy beforehand, you map out that hidden terror. Your entire approach changes. You say, we know the biggest risk with AI tools right now is team burnout during implementation. Here is our exact 14-day seamless onboarding plan that requires zero downtime for your staff, making you look like a visionary to your CEO.
Oh, wow. You just dismantled their deepest anxiety before they even had to voice it. That makes your ask incredibly hard to reject.
Because you aren't just selling a product anymore. You are selling safety. In an era of constant information overload and massive career anxiety, taking the time to truly map the other person's hidden pain points is the ultimate form of leverage.
All right, so the foundation is built. I know my value, I know my walkaway point, and I have forensically mapped their fears. But all the mental prep in the world doesn't matter if my voice shakes when it's time to actually pull the trigger.
Execution is everything.
Right. How do we translate this quiet confidence into the actual ask? Because this is where Castle's advice gets deeply uncomfortable. Let's talk about the actual rules of engagement.
You're referring to his protocol for making the opening move.
Yes. The ask high and shut up rule, and I'm going to push back hard on this. Castle says you must ask for significantly more than your ideal outcome, and the very second you state your number, you stop talking. You let dead silence take over the conversation.
That is the directive, yes.
Okay, let's play this out in the real world. It's a Tuesday afternoon. I'm on a Zoom call trying to land a crucial freelance contract. I throw out a sky-high number, and then I just, stare unblinkingly into my webcam in total silence.
I mean, yes.
And in 2026, when everyone is already on edge, that feels incredibly hostile. It feels like a power trip. Won't people just assume I'm delusional, assume I'm arrogant, and just log off?
No, I get how it sounds, but hear me out. It sounds terrifying because you are confusing boldness with arrogance. And the distinction is entirely in the framing. Castle is meticulous about this. You ask high, yes, but you justify it with objective value, not emotion.
Okay, elaborate on that.
You don't just throw out a ridiculous number and cross your arms. You tie the number directly to the empirical data you gathered during your strategic empathy phase.
I still feel like the delivery is where people fail. Let's look at the syntax. Contrast how people normally make an ask today versus how Castle suggests we do it.
Think about the digital communication habits of the last few years. Look at the Slack messages or emails you receive, or even the ones you send. What is the standard opener when someone wants something?
Oh, it's awful. It's always, I hate to ask, but, or would it be okay if we maybe looked at the budget again? Or, I know things are tight, but I was hoping for something a bit closer to whatever.
It is an epidemic of apologetic language.
It really is.
Castle argues that those phrases are disastrous because they signal profound insecurity. If you sound unsure of your own value, the counterpart's brain instinctively doubts your ask, regardless of how solid the math actually is.
You are literally instructing them to devalue you.
Exactly. Castle provides a completely different framework, which he calls authoritative framing.
Give me the translation. How do I fix it? I hate to ask, but...
You remove the apology entirely and anchor it to mutual benefit. You say, based on the market data and the specific revenue my project generated last quarter, I am looking for X.
Nope, sorry. Anywhere in there.
None. Or, if you are that freelancer, you say, to ensure I can stay fully dedicated to scaling these results for your team without taking on outside clients, my retainer is Y.
Based on the value I bring, I am looking for X. It's incredibly clean. It's emotionally neutral. It's just a statement of fact.
Exactly. It's not a demand. It's not a threat. It is a boundary based on mutual value. You set your anchor higher than your ideal outcome because you are building in room to negotiate down to what you actually want, allowing them to feel like they won concessions.
Which is smart.
But the true psychological warfare, and I use that term lightly, happens in the seconds immediately after you state that clean, authoritative sentence.
The silence. The dreaded, awkward void. Explain the neurology here. Why does it physically hurt us to sit in dead air?
Because we're living in a hyper-stimulated era. Our brains are conditioned by TikTok, by YouTube, by constant notifications to expect relentless auditory and visual input.
We're addicted to noise.
We are. So when a conversation suddenly stops, the human brain registers that void as a social anomaly. It triggers a mild stress response. Cortisol starts trickling into the bloodstream. The silence literally feels like a threat to our social standing.
So what usually happens, if I make the ask and I don't hold the silence, what am I doing?
You sabotage yourself, you make the ask, the silence hits, your cortisol spikes, and you panic. You instantly offer a premature concession just to relieve the physiological pressure of the awkwardness.
Oh, I've done this.
Everyone has. You say, I'm looking for a $90,000 base, but, I could probably make 85 work, or maybe we could talk about extra vacation days if the budget is tight.
I just negotiated against myself before they even opened their mouth. I essentially showed them that I don't even believe the number I just stated.
You gave away your leverage for free, purely to soothe your own anxiety. But if you state the number clearly and just stop, you force the counterpart to sit in that same uncomfortable void.
We're past the hot potato.
Yes. You transfer the psychological pressure to them. Most people cannot handle it. They will start talking, they will start rationalizing, they will often agree to things or offer significant counterproposals just to break the tension. Holding that silence today shows a level of unshakable presence that is incredibly rare. It signals massive confidence.
Okay, I see the mechanics of it. I see why it works. But let's look at the worst case scenario, because this is the nightmare that keeps people from ever trying this.
Let's go there.
You do the prep, you use authoritative framing, you state your high anchor, you hold the agonizing silence, and the counterpart looks at you and gives you a hard, definitive, no, we can't do that. In a remote work culture, a no feels like a slammed door.
It feels final.
It feels like the Zoom call is over, the email thread is dead, and you just ruin the relationship.
Which is exactly why we need to completely redefine what the word no actually means. Because Castle drops a profound reframe here. He says, and this is a direct quote that should be written on a sticky note on your monitor, a no is not a rejection. It is the beginning of the real conversation.
I have to admit, when I read that, it sounded like a platitude. How is a hard no the beginning of anything?
Because amateurs hear no, and they take it as a personal verdict, they pack up their things and leave. But master negotiators understand that behind almost every no is a specific mechanical reason. It is a constraint, a limit, or a fear.
So it's not about you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When a client says, no, we can't meet that price, they're not saying, we hate you and your work has no value. They are saying, under the current parameters, this doesn't fit. They are actually inviting you to ask why.
So a no isn't a brick wall. It's a window into their operational constraints.
Precisely. And Castle provides a tool to pry that window open. The moment you get a hard no, you do not get defensive.
Yeah.
You do not argue. You stay completely calm, and you ask this exact question. What would need to change for this to become a yes?
What would need to change for this to become a yes? Wow, just letting that sink in, that is a brilliant piece of conversational judo.
Why does it work so well? Break it down.
Well, if I get defensive and say, but my data proves I'm worth it, I am creating an adversary. We are now fighting over positions.
Right.
But when I ask, what would need to change for this to become a yes, I am completely diffusing the conflict. I am essentially recruiting them to my side of the table. I'm forcing them to become a consultant on my deal. I'm saying, okay, the current architecture is flawed. Help me redesign it.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
You shift them from being a gatekeeper to being a problem solver. And this is what opens up the concept of multidimensional negotiation.
Right, because we get tunnel vision. We fixate on a single metric, usually salary, or the total cost of a contract. We
Right.
treat negotiation like a line segment, but it's actually a massive, multi-dimensional chessboard.
Exactly. If you hit a wall on the base price and you think the deal is dead, you're only playing in one dimension. But when you ask what needs to change, they might say, look, our departmental budget for software is strictly capped at 50 grand for this quarter. I physically cannot authorize more.
Ah, so it is a timing constraint, not a value constraint.
Yes. Yeah. So you pivot to a new dimension. You say, okay, if the Q3 budget is capped, what if we sign the contract today at 50 grand, but defer the remaining 30,000 to a Q4 payout tied to specific performance milestones?
That's brilliant.
Or let's look at a 2026 career scenario. If the company is on a salary freeze, what other dimensions are in play?
Oh, there are so many right now. You pivot to a 4-day asynchronous work week. You negotiate a massive tech stipend for AI tools so you can automate half your job. You negotiate accelerated equity vesting. You ask for a dedicated professional development budget. If they can't give you cash, you extract value in time, autonomy, or future leverage.
Exactly. A no in one dimension almost always points to a yes in another, provided you have the curiosity to keep exploring. But you raised a really important point earlier, the physiological reaction.
Oh, right.
How is a normal person supposed to stay calm enough to remember to ask that magic question when their ego just took a massive hit?
Yeah, when someone tells me no, my heart rate spikes to like 120. I feel a flush of embarrassment. My brain wants to either fight them or flee the Zoom call. How do I stay grounded?
Castle has a specific neurological hack for this, and he calls it the emotional buffer.
The emotional buffer. Explain the mechanics of this because it sounds like a game changer.
It is essentially a form of DIY exposure therapy for your amygdala. The amygdala is the part of your brain that processes fear and threat. When you walk into a negotiation, your amygdala is on high alert.
Ready for danger.
Right. If you hear no, it often categorizes that social rejection as a physical threat, triggering the fight or flight response. The emotional buffer is a visualization technique you do before the conversation starts to prevent that hijack.
So wait, I'm visualizing the rejection. I'm actively imagining the worst case scenario.
You are. You sit quietly for 2 minutes before the call, and you literally picture the counterpart looking you in the eye and saying, no, that is entirely out of the question.
Yeah.
You imagine the sting. You feel the slight spike in your chest. And then in your visualization, you practice taking a deep breath and calmly delivering your follow-up question.
I am pre-feeling the pain, so my brain builds a tolerance to it.
You are down-regulating your cortisol response. By the time the actual no happens in the real conversation, your amygdala recognizes the pattern. It says, oh, we've seen this before. This isn't a tiger in the bushes. This is just data.
Oh.
It prevents the chemical flood that causes you to panic. It trains you to take rejections strategically rather than personally.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've survived the rejection. We used the emotional buffer to stay calm. We asked what needs to change, and we're now exploring new dimensions. But how do we actually uncover what they truly want? How do we find those hidden constraints?
This leads us to another massive counterintuitive strategy.
And it requires doing the one thing modern professionals are absolutely terrible at.
You have to keep your mouth shut.
Again. But this time, it's not about holding the silence after an ask. It's silence as an investigative weapon. Look, in our current attention economy, we listen to reply, not to understand.
We really do.
When the other person is talking, we are just waiting for our turn to drop a smart counterargument. We are terrified of dead air.
Which is exactly why deploying silence strategically gives you an almost unfair advantage. Castle talks extensively about the information gap. It builds on what we discussed earlier about the brain's need for closure.
The Gestalt theory stuff.
Yeah, in psychology, there is a concept called Gestalt, the idea that humans perceive things as complete wholes. If a circle is drawn with a tiny gap in it, your brain visually closes the gap. The same thing happens in conversation. When a thought is left hanging, it creates an information gap. The counterpart's brain feels an overwhelming compulsion to fill that void.
So how do we ethically weaponize this information gap to uncover their true constraints?
Castle outlines 2 specific applications. The first is the after-question silence. This is where you ask a deeply calibrated, open-ended question. For example, what is the absolute biggest risk your team faces if this project gets delayed? And then you do not say another word.
Even when it gets awkward.
Even when they pause. Even when they look up at the ceiling to think. Even when the silence stretches to 5, 6, 7 seconds.
And my instinct right there is usually to jump in and rescue them. I'll ask the question, and if they hesitate, I'll say, is it a budget risk or a timeline risk?
Right.
I give them multiple choice answers because I feel bad for the awkwardness.
In the moment you give them multiple choice answers, you let them off the hook. You restrict their thinking to your parameters. But if you hold the after-question silence, here is what consistently happens. They will give you a surface-level answer. Well, the biggest risk is missing the Q3 launch.
And then they stop.
They will stop. They will feel the silence continuing. And because you aren't interrupting, their brain will compel them to keep talking to close the gap. And that second, unprompted ways of talking is almost always where the real truth spills out. They will say, because honestly, if we miss Q3, the VP of marketing is going to gut our departmental funding.
Oh, wow. They literally just handed you their deepest fear purely because you refused to interrupt the quiet.
They negotiate against their own privacy just to relieve the tension of the void.
That's wild. What's the second application?
The second application is reflective silence. This is when the counterpart makes a statement or counteroffer, and instead of immediately responding, you just pause. You look down at your notes, you look thoughtful, you let 2 or 3 seconds pass.
Oh, that has to drive people absolutely crazy. It's so destabilizing.
It creates a tremendous subtle pressure. On one hand, it shows you are carefully weighing their words, which actually builds a weird kind of respect. But simultaneously, it makes them doubt their own offer.
Because you aren't jumping at it.
Exactly. Very often, in that reflective silence, the other person will jump back in and soften their own stance. They'll say, we can offer a 3% raise. Pause, though I suppose there might be some wiggle room for a signing bonus. You extracted a concession without uttering a single syllable.
That is masterful. It flicks the entire paradigm. We always think the person doing the most talking holds the power. We think it's about having a silver tongue. But the most dangerous weapon in a negotiation is actually a hyperactive ear.
Let's take it a step further. Castle pairs this strategic silence with some high-level FBI hostage negotiation tactics to really amplify that active ear, specifically mirroring and labeling.
Let's dive deep into this because this isn't just for corporate boardrooms. This is a psychology hack you can use with your spouse, your kids, your landlord, literally anyone. Explain the mechanics of mirroring.
Mirroring is almost comically simple, but the neurological effect it has on the counterpart is profound. To mirror someone, you simply repeat the last 3 to 5 words they just said, but you do it with a calm, curious, slightly upward inflection, like you are asking a gentle question.
Okay, let's test this. I am going to play a genuinely stubborn, stressed out client. I want to see if I can feel the psychological trap. Ready?
I'm ready. You start.
Look, we just cannot move forward with this contract right now. My team is completely overwhelmed, and we are really worried about the server migration timeline.
The server migration timeline.
Yeah, because the engineering team is supposed to handle the back-end switch on the 15th, and if your software isn't fully integrated by the 10th, the entire migration fails, and we lose days of uptime.
Let's pause the role play right there. Analyze what just happened in your own brain.
Okay, stepping out of character, that was actually really strange. When you repeated the server migration timeline back to me, I felt an immediate, involuntary urge to explain myself.
You didn't feel attacked.
Not at all. I felt like I owed you context. I didn't feel interrogated. I felt, I don't know, invited to vent.
Exactly. I didn't argue with you. If I had said, our software won't delay your migration, we would be in a fight. I would be invalidating your fear. Instead, I mirrored you.
And it felt safe.
Neurologically, mirroring signals similarity and safety. It tells the other person's brain, I am reflecting your reality. We are on the same frequency. It encourages them to elaborate and reveal their underlying constraints without ever feeling defensive. You just gave me the exact dates and the exact team causing the bottleneck, all because I repeated 4 words.
That is wild. And what about labeling? How does that fit in?
Labeling is the emotional counterpart to mirroring. Instead of repeating their words, you name the emotion or the underlying dynamic you are observing. You bring the hidden tension into the light, but you do it with deep empathy. The syntax usually starts with, it sounds like, or it seems like.
So staying with the server migration example, how would you label that?
I would say it sounds like the pressure from the engineering team to hit that 15th deadline is a massive source of stress for you.
And as the stressed out client hearing you say that, man, it makes me feel deeply understood. I feel seen.
And when people feel seen, their amygdala deactivates, their defensive walls drop. You are no longer the aggressive vendor trying to squeeze money out of them. You are standing shoulder to shoulder with them, looking at the problem together. Castle emphasizes that people are infinitely more open to your influence when they feel that you accurately understand their pain.
Okay, this brings us to a critical juncture, because I am listening to everything we've just discussed. Using the information gap to force them to spill their secrets, mirroring their words to extract data, labeling their emotions to drop their defenses, anchoring our goals super high.
A lot of power.
It is. And I have to ask the moral question. Isn't this all just high-level manipulation? Are we just weaponizing psychology to trick people into giving us what we want while making them think we're their best friend?
If you are feeling that hesitation right now, you are exactly where you need to be. Because this is the moment, roughly 3/4 of the way through Castle's philosophy, where the entire framework flips on its head. This is the breakthrough realization that completely cures that feeling of manipulation.
Give us the aha moment. Let's shift the paradigm.
Everything we have talked about up to this point is not designed to overpower someone. It is not designed to trick them. All these tools are in service of what Castle calls the ego release.
The ego release. Unpack that for me.
Think about why most negotiations fail. They fail because both parties walk into the room, or the Zoom call, trying to prove how smart they are. They want to win the argument. They want to flex their authority. They're desperate to have their ego stroked.
Yeah, it's a giant ego contest.
The ego release is the radical decision to let all of that go. You actively let their ego win the interaction.
Wait. I let them feel like they won. I let them feel like they're the smartest person in the room.
Yes. Because people are infinitely more likely to say yes to a complex deal and follow through on it enthusiastically when they feel like the solution was their idea. It is not about who wins the debate. It is about making the counterpart feel like a genius for agreeing to a structure that you carefully guided them toward.
So you let them take the steering wheel, but you've already subtly paved the road that leads exactly where you want to go.
You guide them using the value equation. Castle breaks this down into clarity, relevance, and trust. When you use silence, mirroring, and labeling, you aren't laying a trap. You are using radical empathy to gain crystal clarity on what is relevant to them.
You aren't pushing an agenda.
You lead entirely with questions. You ask, help me understand what a massive win looks like for you in this quarter. You gather all their fears, all their constraints, all their goals, and you use that raw material to build a custom solution.
Wait, so the ultimate power move, the highest level negotiation tactic in the world, isn't aggression at all. It's an almost extreme form of empathy.
That is the big realization. Yes.
You aren't fighting them across the table. You are physically and mentally stepping to their side of the table. You are acting as a trusted advisor, helping them solve their own terrifying corporate problems, and the solution you build together just so happens to include your high anchor and your terms.
That is the absolute secret to selling without selling. When you combine an unshakable goal anchor with radical empathy, manipulation is impossible. You aren't tricking them. You are curating a highly tailored solution that legitimately serves their deepest needs, while strictly protecting your own boundaries. You cease to be a vendor or an employee asking for a handout. You become an indispensable partner.
That completely sterilizes the gross, combative feeling of the word negotiation. If you do this correctly, negotiation is actually an act of service. You are helping someone untangle their own mess.
It is an act of service. And pragmatically speaking, it is how you build massive long-term leverage. Which leads us into the final phase of Castle's blueprint. Because once you adopt this ego release mindset, the actual economic structure of the deals you make will transform. You have to reject zero-sum thinking entirely.
Explain zero-sum thinking in this context.
A zero-sum mindset assumes that every negotiation is a fixed pie. If I negotiate a slightly bigger slice for myself, it mathematically means you get a smaller slice. It is a win-lose framework.
Someone has to lose.
Right. Castle warns that in a modern, highly interconnected economy, operating with a zero-sum mindset is the fastest way to ruin relationships and leave massive value undiscovered. The goal of a master negotiator is never to fight over the existing slices. The goal is to invent ways to expand the pie.
Let's ground this in the reality of 2026. Budgets are tight. If a company only has $100,000 allocated for a project, that pie is $100,000. I can't magically use empathy to conjure another 50 grand out of thin air. How do you expand a pie that is strictly capped?
You expand it by moving the conversation away from positions and digging into interests. This is perhaps the most crucial economic distinction in the entire book.
Break down the mechanical difference between a position and an interest.
A position is the surface-level demand. It is the number written on the piece of paper. It is what people say they want. So a client's position is, I need this contract for 20% less. Your position is, I demand my full rate. If you battle over positions, you are just haggling. You are playing tug of war, and someone is going to lose.
It's like a couple arguing over the thermostat. One position is 72 degrees, the other position is 68 degrees. You argue, you compromise at 70, and both people sit there slightly uncomfortable and annoyed. Nobody won.
That is a brilliant analogy. Compromise on positions usually leaves everyone dissatisfied. But an interest is the underlying, often hidden reason why they are demanding that position. Why does a client want a 20% discount? Maybe their true interest is, my department has severe cash flow issues this month, and if I authorize a massive upfront payment, I'm going to get fired.
Ah, so their interest isn't about devaluing your work, it's about cash flow survival.
Exactly. If you uncover that underlying interest, by using your silence, your mirroring, your strategic empathy, you don't have to lower your total price. You can invent creative trade-offs that address their actual fear. You expand the pie by introducing new dimensions.
So I could say, I can't drop my total rate, but what if we restructure the billing? What if we do a small 10% retainer now to get started and defer the remaining 90% until next quarter when your new budget unlocks?
Yes. You kept your full rate, protecting your position, but you entirely solve their cash flow panic, protecting their interest. And this leads directly to a highly tactical execution strategy called log rolling.
Log rolling. I've heard the term, but how does it actually function in a complex corporate negotiation?
Log rolling is the art of trading off concessions on issues of unequal importance. It's recognizing that you and the counterpart value different variables at different weights.
Walk me through a concrete 2026 example, say an asynchronous remote work contract.
Let's do it. You are negotiating a major consulting contract. To the client, having you available for synchronous live Zoom meetings every morning at 9 a.m. is incredibly important to their company culture. To you, waking up for a 9 a.m. Zoom call is miserable, but it doesn't actually cost you money. However, getting access to their proprietary AI data models is vital for you to finish the work quickly, but to them, granting data access is standard procedure and costs them nothing.
So we have heavily mismatched priorities. My pain point is their cheap concession, and their pain point is my cheap concession.
Precisely. So you log roll, you don't compromise, you trade full victories. You say, I will agree to the daily 9 a.m. synchronous meetings, which gives them exactly what they desperately want in exchange for immediate unrestricted API access to your data models on day one, which saves you massive amounts of time.
You aren't meeting in the middle.
No. You are conceding on points that are cheap for you but highly valuable to them, and you are demanding points that are cheap for them but highly valuable to you.
That is incredibly elegant. It's not a compromise where we meet in the middle and both lose a little. Everyone walks away with 100% of their top priority. It's pure collaboration.
It is. But here's the catch. Log rolling, expanding the pie, the ego release, all of this relies entirely on one fundamental variable, trust. Which brings us to the final, pragmatic truth of Castle's philosophy. Trust as long-term leverage.
Let's talk about that. Because if I am log rolling, a cynical person might think, well, shouldn't I lie? Shouldn't I pretend that the 9 a.m. Zoom calls are a massive, painful burden for me so I can squeeze even more concessions out of them when I finally agree to it?
Castle is ruthlessly against that, and not just for moral reasons. He views trust not as a preachy ethical mandate, but as a hardcore, pragmatic economic advantage. Trust lowers transaction costs.
Explain that. How does trust lower costs?
If you lie about your priorities to squeeze out an extra concession and they eventually find out, which they almost always do when a long-term working relationship, what happens?
They never trust you again.
The next time you negotiate with them, they won't believe a word you say. They will demand endless documentation. They will bring in their legal team to scrutinize every comma. The negotiation will take 3 months instead of 3 days. The friction goes through the roof. Lying literally costs you time and money in the long run.
Right. If they trust you, deals happen over a quick phone call. If they don't, deals die in committee.
Exactly. Being transparent about your interests, meaning you honestly tell them what matters to you and what doesn't, without giving away your bottom line BATNA, builds a robust partnership. The people who play dirty, the zero-sum operators, they might squeeze out a marginal win on a single deal, but they burn the bridge. In a hyper-connected 2026 digital economy, your reputation is your ultimate leverage.
That makes total sense.
The trusted negotiator gets the benefit of the doubt when a project goes sideways. They get the repeat business without having to pitch for it.
Integrity isn't just about feeling good about yourself. It is the most profitable, highly leveraged strategy you can deploy over a 10-year career.
When you release your ego, deeply understand their interests, log roll creatively, and operate with absolute transparency, you are no longer just closing a transaction. You are engineering a partnership.
Yeah.
That is how you build a bulletproof career in a volatile market.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of psychological and strategic ground today. Let me try to synthesize this entire blueprint we just unpacked.
Take us through the journey.
We started with the realization that confidence is not a mood. It is the result of extreme preparation. You establish your goal anchor to set the gravity of the room, and you build internal fearlessness by knowing your BATNA, your walkaway plan.
The unshakable foundation.
Then you confront the ask, you ditch the weak apologetic slack language, you use authoritative framing to state your value clearly, and then you endure the neurological discomfort of holding absolute silence.
You transfer the pressure of the void to them.
Right. When they inevitably hit you with a no, you don't succumb to an amygdala hijack. You use the emotional buffer to pre-regulate your cortisol. You realize that no is just data revealing a constraint, and you ask the pivot question, what would need to change for this to become a yes?
Unlocking the multidimensional chessboard.
From there, you investigate. You use the information gap in the after-question silence to make them fill the void. You use FBI mirroring and labeling to make them feel deeply understood, causing them to drop their defensive walls. And you do all of this to execute the ego release.
Letting their ego win.
You stop trying to sound smart, you step to their side of the table, and you use radical empathy to build a solution that serves their underlying interests rather than fighting over surface position.
You expand the pie, you log roll your priorities, and you build massive, frictionless leverage through long-term trust.
It really is a complete masterclass in human dynamics. Honestly, I am walking away from this looking back at every asynchronous message I sent this week and cringing at how much leverage I gave away purely because I wanted to avoid an awkward pause.
It permanently changes the lens through which you view communication. But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply provocative thought. A challenge to chew on as you go about the rest of your day, building on Castle's core assertion that we are always in a state of negotiation.
Let's hear the final challenge.
We have spent this entire deep dive talking about what happens when you speak up. We've strategized the power of making the ask and structuring the deal. But if avoiding negotiation is costing you money, autonomy, and peace of mind, I want you to ask yourself right now, what are you secretly negotiating by not speaking up?
Oh, that hits hard.
Are you accepting the default settings of your career, the boundaries in your relationships, or the crushing workload on your desk simply because your nervous system is afraid of 5 seconds of awkward silence? Every single time you accept the status quo without questioning it, you are still actively negotiating. You're just negotiating against yourself. You are quietly agreeing to settle for less.
You are signing a contract you didn't even read every single day.
So look at your calendar tomorrow. Look at your inbox. What default setting in your life desperately needs to be renegotiated? Because the other side is already anchoring their reality. It is time to anchor yours.
That is a thought that is going to keep me up tonight. And hopefully it gets you, the listener, fired up to take back a little bit of control. Because like we said at the very beginning, you think you only negotiate when you are buying a car. You are negotiating your reality minute by minute.
It is time to start doing it on purpose.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the art of negotiation. We encourage you to step into your very next conversation, whether it's a high-stakes board meeting or a simple text thread, not just ready to speak, but ready to lead. We will catch you on the next one.